Hey everybody, my name is Sarah Fouts and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of American Studies and director of the Public Humanities minor at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I'm also a 2017 graduate of the Stone Center for Latin American Studies at Tulane, so I'm excited to be back in this space. Today I'm going to present on my research, which is about New Orleans and Honduras and migration between these places. I'm going to focus this presentation on palm oil, tourism industries, and displacement in Honduras. But my broader research looks at after Hurricane Katrina in 2005, when tens of thousands of reconstruction workers came to the city to help clean up and rebuild. A lot of those folks ended up settling in the city, establishing, families, establishing businesses. A lot of people opened up restaurants and taco trucks. And the majority of the Latinx community was originally from Honduras. So there's a strong tie between New Orleans and Honduras. And my work predominantly focuses with construction workers and food vendors that have established themselves in the city. And I worked particularly with a group called the Congress of Day Labor, so a grassroots organization that emerged after Katrina to fight for the rights of these immigrant communities. But my question for today's presentation is where I'm going to focus mostly in Honduras is why are people migrating from Honduras, right? There's a lot in the news about, reasons why people are leaving, right? They're fleeing violence, gang violence, narco trafficking. They're looking for jobs, opportunities, education, right? Devastation after the hurricanes that hit there. There's, a lot of this framework, but really, I want to get at the root of these issues, which I argue that all those are correct, but also I think we need to foreground land more in these discussions of migration. So I argue as policies have increasingly favored corporate interest and privatization since the 1990s, land for sustenance living has been swallowed up by the tourism industry and the palm oil industry, which are part of the large scale agricultural um, the growth of large scale agriculture. As a result, Hondurans are forced from their ancestral lands to cities, and as these cities become too violent, they're forced to places like the United States. This framework for thinking about this question came from a quote from one of the construction workers, members of the Congress of Day Laborers, who said, "The struggle began as a right to land in my country and continues as a fight for the right to my new city." I very much like Justin Wolf uses historical methods, and Amalia Leguizamón uses sociological methods. I use ethnographic methods for my research, which is a research approach where you look at people in their cultural setting. So you go to a place in the cultural setting, you work with people for an extended period of time to produce a narrative account contextualized within a theoretical framework. So that's my approach to research. And most of my ethnography is based in New Orleans, where I spent over 6 years in that city doing this research, and I also spent 2 summers of fieldwork in 2013 and 2015 in Honduras. The theoretical framework I use should be somewhat familiar to the discussions that you all have had in this workshop thus far, right? Really around this concept of extractivism. But I argue that we need to expand the theoretical use of the word extractive and extraction and extractivism to also include extractive culture. So like cultural appropriation, this takes place with tourism economies, right? No compensation for this extraction of culture without compensating the groups that produce that culture, and extractive labor, which is a little more common, thinking about exploitation, not paying wages or not paying benefits, etc. And then really kind of based, grounded, which I'll talk a lot about today, is these extractive land and resources through dispossession. I'm going to focus through two areas. One is palm oil and the other is tourism industry. And palm oil, if you're not familiar, it's likely that you have consumed palm oil maybe within the last week, maybe even today. Palm oil is located in things such as uh, Girl Scout cookies, Oreos, Insta noodles, shampoos, soaps. It's in a lot of things. It's ubiquitous. When the FDA banned trans fats, palm oil was one of the main um, commodities to replace trans fats in a lot of foods and products. So palm oil, and so with this rise in demand in palm oil globally, it's being produced and harvested in a way that is really kind of not only displacing people, but also wetlands, tropical forests, a lot of other environmental devastation as well throughout the world. And in particular, it's growing in Honduras. Tanya Kirsten, who wrote a book about palm oil in Honduras in particular, she argues the collapse of smallholder agriculture led to a flood out of outmigration, disrupting family structures and community life in the countryside. So you could see, she's also really illustrating how when, these big lands, like wealthy elite landowners have really expanded through land grabs a lot of the palm oil land to be able to grow more. They've displaced a lot of these small scale farmers from producing sustenance farms. And that's had a pretty detrimental impact on pushing people off their land in different ways. And I also show how not only it's also contributed in Honduras to the devastation of wetlands and other environmental damage. I also argue that, coupled with palm oil is the growth of the tourism industry, which a lot of places, not just Honduras, use the tourism industry narrative as, job creation and, really kind of building up the economy in different places, but at the expense of whom, right? So in this case, it's at the expense of the Garifuna people who have lived on the coastal Honduras since the 17th century. They've developed, different cultural traditions that are really integral to that region. A lot of their fishing villages, and have UNESCO protections to their culture through intangible cultural heritage. Yet they're still having to fight for their land rights against a growing and expanding tourism economy in the coastal region, which is a case study I'll look at. I make an argument here that also, while palm oil and tourism industries are, linked in these ways of land grabs, but they also both build on these histories of banana industries, which you all have heard about to some degree. And, in the ways that both palm oil and tourism industries build upon these legacies is both through the land that they are built on, but also the infrastructure in which they occupy as well. So, most notably in 1998 with Hurricane Mitch, which was very devastating to the Central America, particularly Honduras. And it wiped out a lot of the banana plantations, a lot of what Chiquita in particular owned. And so the palm oil production, it kind of coincided with that demand, and they replaced a lot of the banana plantations growing in that kind of northern region of Honduras. As well as occupying a lot of you can see the processing plant in the picture here, which is a historical postcard image. But there's a processing plant right outside where the case study I'll discuss mentions in just a second. They have actually used a banana processing plant for palm oil processing there as well. So you can see the infrastructure, not only the land, but also the infrastructure is being used for these similar extractive industries. And for the tourism industry, it's less the land, but more the architecture and the like administrative buildings that were left empty have now been occupied and refurbished for these tourism practices. So you see a tourism sector. So you see how the literal spaces are being occupied and really kind of reimagining these notions of, extractive economies, tourism economies, exploitative labor practices that are very much part of the Banana Republic history. The two case studies I will focus on just to kind of give you a more grounded idea of what I'm talking about is this is the north coastal region of Honduras. And I look at the Raymond, who's in the top left image, and then is part of the Barra Vieja Garifuna village, and fighting with other Black indigenous folks in that region against the expansion of the Endura resort and golf course, which they already occupied that much land. They've already taken lots of acres from the Garifuna, and they're trying to grow even further. And this is happening with other cruise industries and other hotels as well. And then just across the lagoon, you could see the village of Marillon, which established along the San Alejo River. And when Santiago is featured in this picture, and he owns a bar in Marillon. And his daughters actually have a restaurant in New Orleans, and that's how I met him. And so his village was, when these palm oil plantations, which this is the road going out to his village, it's just surrounded by palm oil, which is those trees, is the palm oil is the fruit that comes out of it and is processed for the oils that are used in the different products. And instead of, and see, this is in the northern coastal part of Honduras. And so instead of flooding the palm oil crops, the owners of the landowners had the San Alejo River redirected so it would flood the river in Marillon. And this completely devastated this tiny village. A lot of the sediment from the flooding of the river filled up the houses, including Santiago's first bar. And you could no longer go into that space because it looked like it was filled with quicksand. And then the house of one of his daughters, for when she would return from the United States, was also completely destroyed because of the flooding from that was redirected to not hit the plantation, the palm oil, and instead would hit the village. And there's very little recourse, right? What Santiago ended up having to do was just move his business further inland, and just really kind of devastated a big portion of this tiny village. And not only by redirecting the dam, or kind of redirecting the river as it was flooding, but also the devastation of the wetlands rendered the community very much vulnerable to excessive flooding. And then with the Raymond, who's featured here, what happened was when the government of Honduras very much sides with these private enterprises. And so they had the military come in 2014 and completely knock down a lot of these huts that were, the part of the community of where the Garifuna people lived. And they were completely destroyed and wiped out. Raymond had rebuilt his tiny hut here after the military had knocked his down, and they're trying to threaten and scare them away from these lands so that Endura can keep building out their another golf course and ecotourism, etc. There is some recourse, right? There's Ofrane, which is a Black fraternal organization of Honduras that's fighting against this, but they experience a lot of violence against them. There's transnational solidarity movements in New Orleans. This was in 2016. They're fighting against the corrupt president to oust him. But with the case of Berta Cáceres, the resistance come with retaliation. 123 environmental activists have been killed in Honduras since 2009. So you see, what recourse is there, right? But recentering these questions, these discussions about land, right, is really important to thinking about why people are migrating, and that's kind of one of the takeaways out of this presentation today. So please, thank you for listening, and reach out to me at sfouts@umbc.edu, and thank you for your time.